The true test here is to see whether old flour can still make bread. We're all guilty of having leftover flour. Whether you planned to make bread but actually forgot about that bag of flour, or maybe this is more of the emergency flour that you had hoped that you would be making bread with. Who knows? But we want to see whether 1 year or 2 years will actually have any effect on making a really good quality bread. Now, I've chosen a very, very lazy style of making bread. The true test is whether it would actually do what it's meant to be doing. The reason why I haven't gone for a more traditional route of making bread is whether it's a good test whether this sort of flour still has kept their quality to still produce any growth, any proofing, and to see whether it has a huge impact on the yeast, whether the yeast works with it well or not. And lastly, I've got 2 different types of brands of flour here. One's from Lidl and one's from your every supermarket. So at the end of the day, what we're proving is that leftover flours or flour sitting in your pantry can still be used and shouldn't be thrown out. Okay, let's crack on. Let me introduce to you 2021, 2022, 2023. But before I reveal them, let's do a little rewind. Okay, so this is 2021. Now, I've been keeping her for a long time. She was my backup bag of flour, and honestly, I didn't feel any difference with the grain of flour or anything, and I'm not one to really recognize anything. Now, this is 2022. I have clearly missed 21 and digged into 22. Clearly did a bit of baking them. Again, nothing crazily different about this flour. I didn't see any textural difference. I just feel sorry, really. I feel like I wasted so much flour at this point. But hey, we're testing this recipe for a real reason. You can see no difference between the 2 flours. In fact, they don't look any different either. So, this is this year's bag of flour. Haven't been open, clearly old bag of flour now. I should have used it in June 2023, but I didn't see any visible difference. Okay, so let's start measuring out the ingredients. Everything is going to be in the description down below, so please do check that out. This is 8 grams of salt to 200 milliliters of water. Now, this is one of my favorite recipes to make bread because it's so fail-proof that anyone can make it, and it just requires 4 ingredients. Now, we're just testing the bread flour here. Measuring this 3 times over was quite boring, but actually the result was quite interesting. Now, for the bread flour and the yeast, it's 1 sachet to 400 grams of bread flour. Like I said, super straightforward. Mix all the ingredients together in a bowl and then set it to the side in a kind of a decent sealed bowl or box. I've chosen to use plastic box so you can see all the way around the actual effect and the growth of it. A lot of it is relying on nature, for the proofing and for the yeast and the dough to grow. So again, such a simple, relaxed recipe. Now, like I said, you don't have to do this. You can put it into a metal bowl with a cling film or cloth. It would still work. Now, after 4 hours, impressive results really. You can see here, like in the 2021, nothing. It's still crumbly, a little bit dry, nothing crazy is happening. Working up to 2022 and 2023, interesting results. You can start seeing big, air bubbles forming. Definitely in the 2023, the bread flour is still good quality. You can tell that obviously, the bread itself is forming to some extent. Super interesting in terms of how different each box is, and actually you will find that the smell is quite different as well. And I didn't think this was a big factor until you give 2021 a big sniff, and I know you can't do that through the screen, but oh my god, just trust me here, it smells super alcoholic compared to the other 2. But you will start to see bubbles forming, so clearly it's still working. The yeast is working really hard to basically proof these bread, but this is 4 hours, so we're gonna have to leave it for anything up to 12 to 24 hours. Honestly, you can leave it in the fridge or somewhere decently warm, and it will grow on its own. Okay, this is 12 hours now, and you can see significant changes. It's actually crazy how much difference you can get between these three. Now you can tell I have formed the last two into a ball-like shape just to show you how impressive the yeast is in both of these two doughs. 2021 looking kind of the same, nothing's changing. We will be baking this. Don't expect good results is all I'm saying. It looks kind of sad, but these two beauties are growing steadily. I'm going to leave this for actually an additional hour just because I'm prepping the oven to basically bake each individual one of them. Now I promise you guys, no kneading was done to any of these dough. In fact, as you saw in 2021, I did not touch it whatsoever. I let it grow on its own. I did shape these last two for a real reason, to show you the actual massive expanse of bubbles the yeast creates on its own. Now a little technique for baking is to basically leave these dough as puffy as you see them. You don't want to knock any air out because that structure will be creating those big bubbles you will see in your loaf. I kind of struggled with this one to tap it out, but gently as possible, nudge it, give it time. It's a little bit shy, however it's really worth the patience in this one. I mean, it's for the long game here. You've already waited 12 to 24 hours. What is a couple more hours? But yeah, definitely so funny to look at as well. Okay, stop fondling with your bread and let's crack on with baking it. Now it's super important to make sure that your oven is super duper hot. So I've set mine at 200 degrees or 450 degrees Fahrenheit. I've got a actually substitute to a Dutch oven. I've got a cake tin and a tray, which will basically create the same environment. The best thing here to do is also add additional moisture, whether it's a little bit of water or ice, to create the amazing crust on this loaf of bread. Now, the one key thing that you have to remember is bake it for 30 minutes with the lid on, and then take the lid off. This will basically create that beautiful brown colour. We can finally wrap up the leftover bread recipe. Now I'm just going to show you the results. I'm not completely happy with one of them, but I think I know why, and I think it's much easier to show you guys than actually explain it. Okay, so this is the 2021 flour. It's very interesting texture. I'm just going to show you it. It is quite the beauty. The actual crumb or the actual intersection, very tight, very tight. Now the 2022, not so great either. So not as tight, much more open, and actually you can tell by just the disperse of it, this opened a lot more. Just to explain to you how it smells, and it's really interesting. So this one smells like, if you guys are familiar with the rye bread, that's what is exactly what it smells like. It also smells and tastes like it as well. Now with this one, it's less sour, less punchier in terms of the actual fragrance. However, still very similar qualities to a rye bread. In fact, I think the 2022 one is much more fresher, much more like lighter and younger rye bread. This one's definitely a packed rye bread. Now saying that, I'm going to give it a taster. So I put these two both into the toast. So this is the 2021, this is the 2022. You can tell the opening. The 2022 still looks really good, whereas the 2021 not so much. I put some butter in it as well. I don't like the taste of the 2021, but crust really good. This crust, if I can give it a score for the crust, it's a good 9 out of 10. It's not tough. The flavour of the bread is not my favourite, but my favourite part is definitely the crust. Now, the crust is all down to the moisture, so that's why I was adding the ice and some water onto the tray to keep up that moisture. The whole idea is to practically basically make sure that crust forms first before cooking the inside. This is the 2022 one, much more favourable in terms of looks as well. And like, listen to this. Oh yeah. I'm just probably gonna take a bite of the top. Bread noobs like me out there who has no idea what the difference is, and there's probably gonna be some bread experts and professionals. I quite frankly, I'm gonna obviously say the 2022 one's far better. The bread is much nicer, and the bread is like, you can tell that the way that it's opened up, even though it's quite tight, it's still very easy to eat, very soft, like spongy soft, if that makes sense. But you will get this sort of type of texture in a no knead bread, because obviously there is no gluten built up to this. I think that's the phrase of it. What I find with the taste of it is it's less sour, it's more fragrant, easier to eat. But what I will say is obviously you can tell a huge difference to the 2023 flour. The 2023 loaf, much more attractive. I hear that crust. So much nicer. It's just come out of the oven, it's very fresh, but it sounds so good. So you can tell massive difference already on what it looks like based on the bread. But you can tell automatically just by the sound of it. So 2022, not so hollow, not a deep sound whatsoever, and then 2023 automatically different. The rise is the same on all cross board. They all rose nicely, they all bloomed and that kind of grew to what I expected. Okay, so as a result, look at the cross section of the 2023 flour. Super open. Obviously it's still quite close, but you can tell that compared to the sound as well, but compared to the 2022 at the bottom, you can tell how much difference it makes. Complete difference, and like the sounding completely changes itself. So this is amazing. Also, this is going to be the taste for it. Again, great crust because of the moisture we added in later. This has got no butter, I don't think it needs it. Oh god. Yeah. Hands down. Tastes like bread as well. Has that amazing like stone bread taste because of the way it's cooked. It tastes like being back in Greece with its like traditional bread. So what do I think? So 2022, 2023 flour. Amazing difference how 1 year can change. How it can just change the actual course of the bread's growth, to the way it cooks, to the way it sounds. You know, it's crazy. Okay, so what have I done? What I've done is old flour makes not so great bread. So definitely don't waste it. When you get a bag of flour, don't save it as emergency. Just use it as and when. I think everyone had the same idea during the pandemic to store their flour and not use it for an emergency. Flour doesn't last, it doesn't make great bread. You have this sort of very hard, you know, thing out of it. And I've used a very like basic, non-complicated method to make bread. It's the laziest leftover bread recipe you will ever try. Use the flour up as soon as you get it, within 6 months preferably, because it goes to show like how much the bread varies from one another. To some extent this video has failed because obviously I can't prove that you can use leftover flour for very much. You can always repurpose it for compost, but other than that, that's the amount of success you would get out of there really. I don't know whether it this is actually good. So obviously you'll have to leave that in the comments down below whether this should be edible. It is not really to my taste, so I don't really want to throw it away, but very much a little I can do with it. It would be interesting to see whether anyone else has any other opinions to it. I just want to say one final thing. What I've noticed with the older flour bread, so the 2021, even the 2022, it smelled really alcoholic, and I think a lot of that alcohol burnt off, obviously in the oven, which made it taste that sort of rye sourness. And I think that's what the difference between the 2021, 2022 and 2023. The final the final mouthfeel, is that even a word? Isn't that the phrase? It just tastes like, just the contrast is like the oldest bread tastes super sour, not in like the sort of lemon sour, just like not even the sour bread sour, it's just like that strong rye taste, which is super interesting because you can instantly smell that when the bread was proofing, you can smell that. In terms of the 2023, you get less of that smell. It's a much duller fermenting smell. If you ever made bread or any form of dough with a donut or any form of carb of that sort, when you're fermenting and proofing the bread, it doesn't smell like alcohol, like as if you were fermenting beer or wine or anything. It has a very softer proofing smell, and that's how you know the sugar's been like the sugar's doing its work. In this case, I just find that it's really hard to not notice it because the moment you open that lid, it's so like prominent. So I think that's a big indication of why like fresh flour is super important. So I did some research about that. Okay, so here, a lot of research says, and this is kind of a random research, it's not really like anything specific. Now, bread flour tends to be optimal use anything between 4 to 6 months of purchasing it. So even if it's a year-old bread flour, it may not be as effective as the day you bought it, which is so interesting. And also because of the way ice cream pan because of the way it's been stored, it could also change like the flavor profile, like the natural oils, the acidity, the sugar content. Because of all of that, that's probably the reason why bread tastes more rancid. Like, I think that's why bread tastes much more punchier and sour over time, is because it's losing all those what would have been its original nutrient factors. So that was really interesting to find out, and it's interesting to find out that a lot of people are asking the same thing: can you use expired flour? And I guess the answer here is no, you can't, because it changes what you would have normally made had you just bought fresh flour. The actual flour has changed. However, what I realise is, based on just like reading a couple of other people, based on what I read on other people's blog, that expired flour is not necessarily bad for you. It just doesn't taste as nice. It's not as what you expect, and it's expected to be okay for you. It's not really bad or good. It's not advisable to have old flour or make bread from old flour. Obviously people would suggest to make it with fresh flour, but it's not always the case. So that's super interesting. The more you know. Try out the recipe yourself. Try use obviously fresh flour. If you do have old flour, try it yourself to see whether you like the taste of it. I can't say it's to everyone's preference, but flour is one of those interesting ingredients that I never knew it changed so much over the course of a year or two. I'm gonna love you and leave you and enjoy this bread.